1,158 square kilometers. 300,000 tons of gold. Zero conflict. And one quietly signed agreement that changed the future of energy. In a time when territory is fought over with weapons, sanctions, or propaganda, China redrew the map, without a single shot fired. The target? A frozen expanse few even knew existed, the Pamir Plateau. This isn't the story of a war. It's the story of a quiet masterstroke. Inside China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a quiet archival operation had been unfolding for decades. Tucked away in climate-controlled vaults were thousands of historical documents. Qing Dynasty maps drawn by imperial cartographers. Tax ledgers from remote border towns. Military orders issued to garrisons stationed along ancient caravan routes. These weren't just historical curiosities. To China, they were legal artifacts, evidence that parts of the eastern Pamirs had once been under Chinese jurisdiction. During the Western Han Dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago, the imperial envoy Zhang Qian passed through this region. He laid the foundation for the ancient Silk Road and opened contact with Central Asian kingdoms. Centuries later, the Tang Dynasty expanded Chinese presence even further west. The Yangtze Protectorate was established, a permanent military and administrative base to project power across the region. But the 19th century changed everything. As the Qing Empire weakened, the Great Game began, an intense rivalry between Tsarist Russia and British India. Both empires pushed into Central Asia. And China, caught in decline, began to lose ground. In 1864, the Treaty of Tarbagatai was signed. Under pressure, the Qing ceded more than 440,000 square kilometers of land to Tsarist Russia, including parts of the northern and eastern Pamirs. Russian explorers soon arrived in the highlands. By 1892, they had already occupied more than 1,100 square kilometers of what had once been Chinese territory. China's response? Diplomatic silence and dotted lines on maps. Under Soviet control, the region remained militarized, but underdeveloped. Then came the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Newly independent Tajikistan inherited this rugged borderland, along with economic collapse, political instability, and almost no capacity to govern the region. But China had never forgotten. Its maps still remembered. Its archives still held the evidence. And its diplomats were already preparing the next move. By the late 1990s, China's foreign ministry began quiet negotiations with Tajikistan. There were no press releases. No media leaks. No diplomatic standoffs. Just low-profile visits. Carefully worded memos. And quiet persistence. Beijing wasn't demanding territory. It was presenting documents, maps, treaties, imperial records. Evidence that spoke for itself. It took nearly 2 decades. But by January 2011, a deal was signed. Tajikistan agreed to transfer 1,158 square kilometers of land in the eastern Pamirs to China. Officially, it was framed as a border clarification. Unofficially, it was one of the most significant territorial shifts in Central Asia in decades. There were no troops. No protests. No UN intervention. Just one line on a map, quietly redrawn. In return, China promised cooperation. A share of future profits. Infrastructure development. And long-term investment in Tajikistan's forgotten eastern frontier. At the time, few realized the true value of the land. That changed in 2018. Chinese geological teams were deployed to the Pamirs. Their task, basic topographic surveys. But what they discovered went far beyond expectations. At a depth of just 300 meters, they struck lithium. Not fragments, not dust. Full-scale, commercial-grade reserves. Lithium, the essential ingredient in batteries. batteries that power electric vehicles, smartphones, and grid storage. And the world was running out. Suddenly, the Pamirs were no longer a frozen plateau. They were a global resource vault. Exploration continued. Within months, the teams uncovered rare earth metals, including promethium-based alloys, used in military radar, satellites, and 5G towers. Then came the gold. An estimated 300,000 tons in ore, valued in the hundreds of billions. It was a discovery that could change the strategic balance of the region. And China had secured it, legally, diplomatically, and without conflict. News of the discoveries soon spread. International media took notice. The Wall Street Journal called it a geo-economic windfall. Analysts around the world asked the same question. Did Tajikistan give up too much, too easily? In Dushanbe, voices of protest emerged. Some citizens were angry. Some politicians called it a national mistake. But the government stood by its decision. They pointed to the roads China was already building, the power stations under construction, the royalties that had begun to arrive. China hadn't just taken the land and left. It had returned with excavators, engineers, and economic plans. And the impact was visible. The Pamirs, once isolated for months by snowfall, were now connected year-round. China funded a 2,100-kilometer road project linking Dushanbe to the eastern highlands. It cut travel time by days. It saved Tajik businesses billions in freight costs. But roads weren't the only gift. China also built schools, hospitals, and hydropower plants in remote communities. Tajik children now had electricity in villages that had never seen light after sunset. It wasn't just foreign aid. It was soft power, the Chinese way. There were no slogans. No banners. No "Made in China" signs. Just working infrastructure. And results. Meanwhile, extraction began. Lithium from Pamir was trucked to factories in Qinghai and Sichuan. Gold fed into industrial markets. Rare earths bolstered China's tech dominance. Former Qing-era military outposts, once ruins from Russia's 19th-century campaigns, were rebuilt. Not as forts, but as heritage sites, part of China's narrative of peaceful restoration. In 2025, a new milestone was reached. China installed the first solar-powered drone station in the eastern Pamirs. It monitored weather, mining output, and ecological change. It also marked something more symbolic, a declaration that this was no longer a buffer zone. It was part of the future. But that future carries risk. The Pamir ecosystem is fragile. Glaciers are melting faster than ever. Pasturelands are shrinking. River flows are destabilizing. Mining accelerates erosion. Roads disturb ancient animal corridors, and restoration is expensive. Environmental researchers estimate that 500 yuan is needed to restore every ton of disturbed soil. To its credit, China has begun experimenting with AI-driven environmental monitoring, low-impact mining, and green energy solutions in high-altitude zones. But critics warn, growth is still outpacing preservation. And once the permafrost is gone, it may never return. Inside Tajikistan, calls for renegotiation still echo. But so do the hum of turbines. And the glow of streetlights in towns that never had them before. For many citizens, it's a trade they've come to accept. What was once forgotten land, cut off from the world, is now central to a regional transformation. The Pamirs are no longer a blank on the map. They are a bridge, linking China, Central Asia, and beyond. A bridge built not with tanks, but with treaties. China's strategy was slow, deliberate, unseen. And in a world that often rewards noise, this victory was built in silence.